Welcome to a quiet journey into the past. Before we drift into the story, take a slow breath, and if you enjoy peaceful history documentaries that help you relax, I invite you to subscribe, leave a like, and share a comment about what time period you want to explore next. Your support helps this calm little corner of the internet continue to grow. Now, allow your mind to settle. Let the soft rhythm of history guide you as we begin a long, gentle exploration of one of the most legendary brotherhoods to ever walk the earth, the Knights Templar.
Our story opens in the early 12th century, a time when Europe was reshaped by faith, conflict, and pilgrimage. Across dusty roads stretching from England to Jerusalem, pilgrims walked for months at a time, driven by devotion but threatened constantly by danger. Bandits, warlords, and shifting political tides made the holy journey perilous. Travelers disappeared, caravans were attacked, and the dream of reaching sacred ground often faded into fear. It is from this landscape of uncertainty that the idea of the Knights Templar begins to form. Not yet as a grand order, not yet as a mighty military force, but as a quiet promise made by a small group of men. At the center of this first spark was Hugues de Payens, a knight of minor nobility but deep conviction. He and 8 companions shared a single vow: to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. It was a modest beginning, almost invisible to the wider world. 9 men and a vow. No treasure, no armies, no fortresses, just a mission and a desire to serve. But history often changes not through grand declarations, but through small, determined decisions made in silence. Hugues and his companions approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with their proposal. The king listened, and perhaps he sensed something in these men, an unusual mixture of humility, bravery, and devotion. He granted them a base within the sacred precincts of the Temple Mount, believed to be the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon. From this location, the group gained the name that would echo across centuries: the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, or, more simply, the Knights Templar. This moment marks the quiet birth of what would become one of the most powerful and mysterious organizations in medieval history. No one at the time could have imagined what was beginning. These men likely expected a life of hardship and obscurity, days spent escorting pilgrims through desert heat, nights guarding dusty roads under foreign stars. Yet something about their mission resonated deeply, far beyond the Holy Land. Whispers spread. Tales of these humble warrior monks reached ears in Europe. Pilgrims returned home carrying stories of knights dressed in plain garments, brave enough to face raiders, yet gentle to those they protected. The idea of men who fought fiercely but lived simply captured the medieval imagination. Support grew. Donations trickled in. More men arrived seeking to join their cause. Still, all of that belongs to the next chapters of our journey. For now, picture those earliest days, a small group living within the old stones of the Temple Mount, rising before dawn for prayer, then mounting their horses to guide travelers along dangerous paths. Their lives were harsh, disciplined, and uncertain, yet woven with purpose. As you breathe slowly and relax into the rhythm of the story, imagine the desert wind brushing against their cloaks, the echo of hooves on ancient roads, and the quiet determination that carried them forward. The Templars had taken their first step, and the world was beginning to watch. As we continue our quiet journey, allow yourself to settle deeper into this story, letting the steady rhythm of history guide your thoughts. In the last part, we watched the humble beginnings of the Knights Templar, just 9 men living within the ancient stones of the Temple Mount. Now, their world is about to grow much larger, shaped not only by the dust of Jerusalem, but by the influential voices of Europe. In the early years, the Templars lived with remarkable austerity. Their rules were unwritten, but their lifestyle resembled that of monks: strict prayer schedules, modest meals, and a vow of poverty so deep that early members often shared a single horse between 2 riders. Their clothing was simple and unadorned, marked only by the quiet dignity of their mission. They slept in communal halls, rose before dawn, and rode out as guardians for any pilgrim who sought their protection. Despite their dedication, the order remained small and largely unrecognized until one single event shifted their destiny. That event was the arrival of a highly respected figure, Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential spiritual leaders of the age. A powerful voice within the church, Bernard saw in the Templars something unique, something pure. To him, they were not merely soldiers, nor merely monks. They were a new kind of warrior, one who fought not for land or gold, but for the safety of others. Bernard's support changed everything. In 1129, the Church held a council at Troyes to discuss the legitimacy of this new brotherhood. Hugues de Paillet appeared before powerful bishops, abbots, and noblemen. With humility, he explained the order's purpose, and with eloquence, Bernard defended it, describing the Templars as warriors guided by faith rather than ambition. The council approved the order, granting it official recognition. More importantly, it gave them a formal code of conduct, the Latin Rule. The Latin Rule shaped every part of Templar life. It instructed knights to avoid luxury, to eat simple foods, to remain obedient and pure of intention. They were to cut their hair short, avoid hunting, and refrain from unnecessary conversation. Their garments were to be plain and their minds focused. The rule emphasized humility, even in victory. Pride was forbidden, excess was forbidden. Their lives were to be lived in service. With this endorsement, the Templars now had something they had never possessed before: legitimacy. Word spread quickly across Europe. Nobles began sending donations: horses, armor, land, and coin. Young men of noble birth, eager to serve a righteous cause, volunteered to join their ranks. The order grew from a small band into a structured organization spanning many regions. One of the most recognizable symbols of the Templars emerged during this era: their iconic white mantle. The Pope granted them the right to wear white as a sign of purity, and soon after, the Red Cross was added, symbolizing martyrdom and sacrifice. When a Templar rode into view, wrapped in that white cloak marked with crimson, it carried a meaning that resonated deeply across Christendom. Even in these early days, the Templars were not simply warriors. They maintained their monastic discipline, praying at set hours, sharing meals in silence, and living under strict order. And yet they were also becoming highly trained soldiers, men who fought with precision, courage, and unwavering unity. Their dual identity made them unique. It also made them increasingly respected. As their numbers grew, so did their responsibilities. They began establishing fortified bases across the Holy Land, each serving as a refuge for travelers and a strategic point of defense. They became known not only for bravery, but for reliability. Pilgrims felt safer, trade routes stabilized, Crusader states depended on their strength. Day by day, quietly and steadily, the order transformed from a small brotherhood into a powerful force. And yet through all this growth, the tone of the Templars remained calm, methodical, and disciplined, much like the rhythm of this story. They were preparing for a larger role in the world, though none could yet predict how influential they would become.
As we move gently into part 3, allow your mind to drift into a slower rhythm, letting each detail settle like dust on an ancient road. The Templars, once 9 humble knights, had become a recognized military order. But what came next would elevate them far beyond the expectations of their founders. Their world was no longer confined to Jerusalem's stony corridors. Now Europe itself opened its gates to them. With formal recognition and the Latin rule guiding their conduct, the Templars began establishing commanderies, or regional houses, across France, England, Spain, Portugal, and beyond. These places served not only as recruitment centers, but as farms, workshops, storage facilities, and training grounds. They were quiet, orderly environments where knights and sergeants prepared for service in the Holy Land. The structure of the order grew more complex. There were knights, sergeants, squires, priests, and administrators, each with defined roles woven into a carefully organized hierarchy. Pilgrims traveling east increasingly placed their trust in the Templars. Letters, coins, and valuables were left in the order's care before long journeys. For the first time, travelers could deposit wealth with the Templars in one region and safely withdraw it in another, using written notes as proof. This simple idea became one of the earliest forms of banking, though the Templars themselves never used that word. To them, it was simply a service, an extension of their mission to protect. As their responsibilities expanded, the order's reputation continued to grow. European monarchs granted them privileges normally reserved for the church. They were exempt from taxes. They answered only to the Pope. Their lands could not be seized by local lords. Slowly, quietly, the Templars became one of the most autonomous organizations in medieval Europe. Their white mantles and red crosses became symbols not only of piety, but of authority. There was a calm confidence in the way the Templars operated. Their discipline was unwavering. Their internal rules, restricting unnecessary speech, prohibiting extravagance, limiting personal possessions, gave them a sense of unity rare in their age. They lived simply, even as their influence grew. Meals were eaten in silence. Weapons were carefully maintained. Their days were marked by prayer, training, and service.
Every action was guided by routine, a rhythm almost monastic in nature. But the order was not only expanding across Europe. In the Holy Land, their presence was strengthening. Castles and fortresses were being constructed and reinforced, each one serving as a stronghold against threats. Among the most famous was Crac de Chevalier, a massive fortress in Syria that rose like a stone crown above the landscape. Its thick walls, deep wells, and storerooms made it capable of withstanding long sieges. Within its halls, Templars trained, planned patrols, and stood watch under sun and moon, ever mindful of their vow. The roads of the Holy Land grew safer under their protection. Pilgrims moved with greater confidence. Trade increased. And as the Templars gained military experience, their reputation as elite warriors began to take shape. They fought in tightly controlled formations, rarely breaking ranks. Their discipline on the battlefield became legendary. Yet even in these years of growth, the order remained true to its modest origins. The motto attributed to the Templars captured this spirit. "Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name." Their victories were credited not to skill alone, but to purpose. Slowly, the Templars transitioned from a small brotherhood into a major power, spiritual, economic, and military. Their influence touched every corner of medieval society. But as their strength increased, so too did expectations, responsibilities, and challenges.
As we move into Part 4, let your thoughts soften and drift into the stillness of the medieval world. The Templars, once quiet guardians of pilgrims, had become a disciplined military force. Yet, even as their responsibilities grew, their identity remained rooted in prayer, humility, and obedience. They were warriors, yes, but warriors shaped by silence, ritual, and devotion. To understand the Templars during the height of the Crusades, imagine a morning within one of their fortresses. Dawn breaks softly across the eastern horizon, casting pale golden light over stone walls. Within the halls, the knights rise from simple cots. They do not speak. Words at such hours were reserved only for prayer. Their white mantles hang neatly, marked by the vivid red cross that symbolizes sacrifice. Before anything else, they gather in the chapel, where chants echo gently through the cool, shadowed air. After prayer, the day unfolds with calm discipline. Weapons are inspected, horses groomed, armor checked for damage. Even in the quiet moments, the Templars prepare for danger. Their training was constant. They practiced mounted charges, defensive formations, and coordinated maneuvers designed to hold firm even against overwhelming numbers. They fought as a single unit, each man trusting the other completely, an essential bond for survival in an age of brutal warfare. On the battlefield, the Templars were known for their courage and for never retreating unless ordered. This rule, simple yet demanding, set them apart. Their charges were feared across the Holy Land. When the trumpet sounded and a line of Templars advanced with lowered lances, their formation was like an arrow aimed at the heart of the enemy. They did not shout or break ranks. They moved with precision and purpose, guided by years of training and a deep belief that their lives belonged to something greater than themselves. Their armor was heavy, their shields thick, yet their movements were surprisingly coordinated. Behind the knights rode sergeants, lighter troops who supported the front line. Together, they formed a layered force that many armies struggled to counter. And though the Templars were famous for their ferocity, they were equally valued for their reliability. Kings and commanders often entrusted them with the most critical tasks, guarding supply lines, defending key fortresses, or holding the center of a formation when the enemy pressed hardest. But the battlefield was not the only place where the Templars demonstrated their discipline. Life between campaigns could be long and uneventful. Days were filled with training, maintaining equipment, tending to horses, and fulfilling religious duties. At night, they slept fully clothed, ready to rise at a moment's notice. Meals were quiet and modest. Conversation was limited. Every aspect of their environment, rules, rituals, and silence, was designed to keep their minds focused and their spirits steady. Yet the Holy Land was unpredictable. The Templars faced scorching heat, long marches, sudden ambushes, and the constant tension of political shifts among Crusader states. Over time, their role became not just military, but diplomatic. They negotiated truces, escorted nobles, and served as trusted intermediaries. Their reputation for honesty and consistency made them valuable in a region where alliances changed often. Yet even the most disciplined order could not escape the realities of conflict. The Crusades grew more complex. The Templars found themselves stretched thin across vast territories. New enemies emerged. Strategies evolved, and the order's responsibilities multiplied. What had begun as a mission to protect pilgrims now required them to navigate a world of shifting power and constant uncertainty. Yet through it all, they remained steady, silent, focused, and bound by vows that gave them purpose. As you rest deeper into the story, imagine their white mantles fluttering in the desert wind, their horses stamped quietly in the dust, and their prayers echoing through stone chambers.
Let your mind drift gently into the next chapter, a period marked not by collapse, but by resilience. After the devastating loss at Hattin and the fall of Jerusalem, the Templars faced one of the darkest moments in their history. Yet even in this shadow, a new light began to rise. Europe, shocked by the news, responded with one of the most famous military campaigns of the medieval world, the Third Crusade. From England, Richard the Lionheart prepared for war. From France, Philip II set sail. From the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick Barbarossa marched east. Though their objectives varied, one shared conviction united them: reclaiming the Holy Land. For the Templars, this crusade represented not only hope, but an opportunity to recover their strength, rebuild defenses, and restore the order's standing. In the Holy Land, the Templars regrouped at their remaining strongholds, Acre, Tyre, and other coastal fortresses that had survived Saladin's advance. These stone bastions, perched along the Mediterranean, became the beating heart of the Crusader effort. Inside their walls, the Templars maintained their routines with unwavering focus: prayer at dawn, drills at midday, and solemn meals in quiet halls. Discipline anchored them, even as uncertainty swirled around them like sea winds. When Richard the Lionheart arrived in the East, he quickly recognized the Templars' value. Their knowledge of the terrain, their disciplined formations, and their chain of command made them essential to his campaigns. Despite their losses at Hattin, the Templars demonstrated remarkable resilience. Their white mantles returned to the battlefield, their red crosses bright beneath the sun. Slowly, they reclaimed territory, step by determined step. One of the most significant victories of the Third Crusade came at Acre. The siege had already dragged on for months before Richard arrived, but with renewed leadership and Templar expertise, the city finally fell. The Templars played a critical role in the assault, guiding troops, organizing defenses, and maintaining pressure on the walls. When Acre surrendered, it became the new center of Christian operations in the East and the new headquarters of the Knights Templar. In Acre's bustling streets, the Templars built a complex that served as a command center, armory, treasury, and training facility. The structure, though long lost to time, was once one of the most impressive buildings in the region. Its thick walls protected the order's archives and resources, while its chambers echoed with the quiet rhythm of monastic life. Although Richard's forces reclaimed several key coastal cities, Jerusalem remained beyond reach. Political tension among Crusader leaders and Richard's need to return to England prevented a final march toward the Holy City. Still, the gains of the Third Crusade stabilized the region and gave the Templars new momentum. They rebuilt their numbers, reinforced their castles, and restored their role as the shield of the Crusader states. Over the decades that followed, the Templars continued to guard the borders of the remaining Christian territories. They maintained watchtowers in Galilee, manned garrisons along trade routes, and patrolled the frontiers with unwavering vigilance. Their dedication to their mission never faltered, even as political tensions in Europe and the Middle East evolved around them. Yet beneath the surface, the world was changing. The Crusader states were shrinking, trade networks were shifting, and the idea of permanent Christian control in the East began to seem less attainable. Still, the Templars continued to stand firm, guided by vows that had defined them since their founding. As you rest deeper into the story, imagine the gentle crash of waves against Acre's harbor, the soft clang of armor being repaired, and the flickering glow of candles in the Templars' chapel. Their resilience carried them forward, but greater challenges lay ahead, challenges that would test the order in ways no battlefield ever had. As we continue our peaceful journey through the story of the Knights Templar, allow your shoulders to relax and let the quiet rhythm of time carry you forward. The Third Crusade had brought renewed strength, yet it did not restore what had been lost. The Kingdom of Jerusalem survived only along narrow stretches of coastline, fragile and exposed. And in these years of uncertainty, the Templars became both the shield and the backbone of the remaining Crusader states. From their headquarters in Acre, the Templars oversaw a network of fortresses, Tyre, Tortosa, Atlit, and a scattering of watchtowers that dotted the landscape like silent guardians. These strongholds were marvels of medieval engineering: thick walls, deep wells, storerooms packed with grain and equipment, and courtyards designed for rapid assembly during siege or alarm. Life inside these walls followed a calm, predictable rhythm. The Templars rose for prayer, tended their horses, trained, and maintained a constant state of readiness. One of their greatest fortresses was Atlet, also known as Chateau Pèlerin, a massive stronghold resting on a rocky peninsula. Surrounded by crashing waves on 3 sides, it was nearly impossible to storm. Within its walls, the Templars stored provisions, weapons, and documents essential to the Order's operations. Decades later, even as the Crusader states weakened, Atlet remained a symbol of steadfast endurance. Yet, despite these fortifications, the balance of power was shifting. In the late 13th century, a new rising force, the Mamluks of Egypt, began reclaiming territory with relentless determination. One by one, Crusader strongholds fell, their defenders overwhelmed by superior numbers and resources. The Templars fought fiercely, but the world around them was changing faster than they could adapt. By 1291, only a handful of cities remained under Christian control, with Acre as the final major stronghold. It was a bustling port, crowded with merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and families seeking refuge from advancing forces. Within this tense environment, the Templars prepared for what they knew would be a defining moment. They repaired walls, reinforced gates, and coordinated defenses with other military orders and local rulers. Despite the growing threat, life in Acre still echoed with a quiet, determined purpose. When the Mamluk army finally arrived, their numbers were overwhelming. Tens of thousands of soldiers, siege machines, and engineers. They surrounded Acre with a ring of steel and wood. The Templars, stationed at critical towers along the northern and eastern walls, held their positions as the sky filled with stones, arrows, and fire. For weeks, the defenders resisted, but each passing day brought more strain. The final assault came with terrible force. Siege towers advanced through the smoke, bridges dropped onto the walls, and wave after wave of attackers surged forward. The Templars fought with the discipline that had defined them for nearly 2 centuries. Shield to shield, sword to sword, unwavering even as the walls began to crumble. Their commanders called for reinforcements, but chaos swallowed the city. Streets filled with fleeing civilians. Flames rose from wooden roofs. The sea churned with boats trying desperately to escape. In the midst of this storm, the Templar fortress near the shoreline became the last corner of resistance. Its walls stood firm, even as the rest of Acre fell. Those inside continued to hold a desperate defense, hoping for rescue by sea. But the Mamluks tightened their siege, and the situation grew hopeless. After a final brutal assault, the Templar stronghold collapsed. Many knights died in the fighting, refusing to surrender, while the few survivors were allowed to flee by boat. And so, in 1291, Acre fell, marking the end of Crusader rule on the mainland. After nearly 2 centuries in the Holy Land, the Templars no longer had a foothold in the place where their story began. Their journey, however, was far from over. As you breathe softly and let this chapter settle in your thoughts, picture the Templars sailing away from the burning city, quiet,
solemn, and determined to continue their mission somewhere new.
As we drift quietly into Part 8, imagine the gentle rocking of waves beneath a wooden hull. The Templars, once guardians of the Holy Land, now sailed eastward under a sky streaked with fading embers. Behind them, Acre, once their thriving headquarters, lay in ruins. Ahead of them waited an uncertain future on the island of Cyprus. The loss of Acre in 1291 marked the end of Christian rule on the mainland. For the first time in nearly 2 centuries, the Templars no longer patrolled the dusty roads of Jerusalem, no longer guarded pilgrims traveling to sacred shrines, and no longer manned the vast fortresses that had anchored their mission. Their identity had been shaped by the Holy Land, and now that land was gone. Yet the order did not dissolve into despair. Instead, with the same steady discipline that had seen them through countless battles, they regrouped. Cyprus, at this time, was a fragile kingdom ruled by the Lusignan dynasty. It sat at the crossroads of trade routes, surrounded by strategic waters. Though smaller and far less influential than the fallen Crusader states, it offered the Templars a place to breathe, rebuild, and plan. The island's coastline shimmered with sunlight. Its hills rolled gently inland, dotted with vineyards, orchards, and small villages. For the Templars, accustomed to the harsh deserts of the East, Cyprus must have felt both peaceful and unfamiliar. Upon arrival, the order began establishing new commanderies and reorganizing its leadership. The rules of daily life remained unchanged: prayer at dawn, silence at meals, and strict obedience to the Latin rule. Yet everything around them carried a different energy. The constant tension of frontier warfare was gone. Instead, the Templars found themselves functioning more as administrators, diplomats, and guardians of shipping routes than as frontline soldiers. Still, they never abandoned hope of returning to the Holy Land. Plans were drafted, alliances explored, and resources gathered. Across Europe, the order maintained its vast network of estates, farms, and commanderies. These places supplied funds, horses, and recruits. The Templars' financial operations, quiet, efficient, and far-reaching, allowed them to remain one of the most powerful organizations of their time. Their experience in safeguarding wealth and transporting funds across long distances made them indispensable to merchants, noble families, and even kings. Yet power earned in peaceful times carries a different weight. Without the unifying mission of defending pilgrims in the Holy Land, the Templars' wealth began to draw scrutiny. Some questioned why a military order needed such resources when no crusade was underway. Others, especially ambitious rulers, saw the order's financial independence as a threat. In Cyprus, the Templars sensed these shifting winds, though much of Europe remained outwardly respectful. Meanwhile, the Knights Hospitaller, once their brothers in shared purpose, were beginning to transform as well. They established a new base on the island of Rhodes and rebuilt themselves into a naval power. The Templars, lacking a similar maritime fortress, found themselves overshadowed in this new phase of crusading efforts. Still, daily life within Templar walls continued with gentle predictability. Their chapels echoed with chants, their storerooms filled with supplies gathered from across Europe. Their armories were maintained with the same meticulous care as before.
The order waited patiently for the next opportunity to reclaim territory in the east, believing firmly that the fall of Acre was not the end, but a temporary setback. Yet that opportunity never came. Over the next decade, political tensions grew. Whispers spread in Europe about the order's wealth and influence. Kings burdened with debt eyed Templar treasuries. Rival groups questioned their purpose now that the Holy Land was lost. And in France, one ambitious monarch would soon seize upon these doubts with devastating consequences. As you breathe slowly and let this chapter settle, picture the Templars on Cyprus, quietly training, quietly praying, quietly waiting, unaware that the greatest challenge to their survival was no longer on distant battlefields, but in the courts of Europe.
As we begin Part 9, let your mind settle into a gentle rhythm, drifting from the warm shores of Cyprus toward the cooler courts of medieval Europe. The Templars had survived the fall of the Holy Land. They had adjusted, rebuilt, and waited patiently for the moment when Christendom might rise once again for another crusade. Yet while the order maintained its discipline, the world around them was shifting, quietly, steadily, and unfavorably. To understand the storm that was gathering, we must turn our attention to France, one of the most powerful kingdoms of the era. There a ruler sat upon the throne whose ambition burned far brighter than his resources. King Philip IV, known to history as Philip the Fair. Despite his calm appearance and dignified bearing, Philip faced enormous financial strain. His wars, political maneuvers, and efforts to centralize power drained the royal treasury. And in a kingdom where money equated to influence, debt was a dangerous weakness. The Templars, meanwhile, possessed wealth, not through greed, but through centuries of careful stewardship. Their commanderies across Europe generated steady income from agriculture, trade, and donations. They served as trusted bankers, safeguarding the valuables of nobles and monarchs. They financed pilgrimages, managed estates, and moved funds safely across borders. Their financial network was efficient, reliable, and widespread. And King Philip owed them money. Quite a lot of it. The more he relied on the Templars, the more he resented their independence. They answered only to the Pope. Their fortresses in France were exempt from taxation. Their order operated outside royal authority. For a king striving to consolidate power, this was intolerable. Yet Philip had no legitimate reason to attack them. No cause, no crime, no public justification. But opportunity has a way of appearing when ambition waits long enough. At the same time, across Europe, doubts were beginning to whisper through the corridors of power. Without the Holy Land, many questioned the purpose of the military orders. Why did the Templars still hold vast estates? Why maintain armies when there was no crusade underway? The Hospitallers had found new purpose at sea, but the Templars seemed caught between two identities: warriors with no battlefield, monks without monasteries. Their devotion was unchanged, but perception was shifting. Philip recognized these murmurs and quietly fanned them. In 1305, a new pope was elected, Clement V, a man who owed his position largely to Philip's influence. Though Clement wished for peace, he also wished to maintain harmony with the French crown. This delicate balance made him vulnerable to suggestion, and Philip's suggestions soon turned against the Templars. Rumors began to circulate. Strange, unsettling accusations whispered in royal courts and taverns alike. Claims that the Templars practiced secret rites, that they worshipped forbidden idols, that they denied sacred truths. None of these charges had solid evidence, and none matched the order's strict discipline. But rumors once released travel swiftly, especially when guided by those who benefit from their spread. The Templars themselves remained largely unaware of the danger growing around them. In Cyprus, they trained and prayed as they always had. In France, their commanderies carried on routine tasks, managing lands, assisting travelers, and maintaining order. Their leaders trusted in their reputation, believing that their centuries of service would shield them from suspicion. But Philip was patient. He waited, gathered information, pressured allies, and prepared a strategy. His goal was not simply to weaken the order, but to destroy it entirely, seizing its wealth and removing its influence from Europe. As you breathe softly, let this moment settle in your thoughts. A calm before a storm. A quiet order standing on the edge of a devastating betrayal.
Take a slow breath as we enter one of the most dramatic turns in the Templars' long history. A moment not marked by the clash of swords or the thunder of horses, but by silence, secrecy, and betrayal. The year was 1307, and across France, autumn winds were beginning to chill the air. Within Templar commanderies, life continued peacefully. Prayers at dawn, quiet meals, methodical work in stables and storerooms. The brothers moved through their routines with the calm certainty of men who believed their order stood on firm ground. But far beyond their walls, an invisible net had already been cast. King Philip IV had prepared carefully and quietly. His accusations, wild, unsettling, and entirely unsupported, had been shaped into a narrative of heresy, blasphemy, and treason. Behind these claims lay a simple truth. Philip needed the Templars destroyed so he could access their wealth and eliminate their independence. But he could not declare this openly. Instead, he cloaked his intentions in the language of righteousness. On the evening of October 12, 1307, sealed orders were delivered to royal officials across France. The envelopes carried strict instructions. They were not to be opened until dawn. Inside, Philip's command was simple and shocking. At first light, on Friday, October 13th, every Templar in the kingdom was to be arrested simultaneously, their properties seized, their leaders imprisoned, their reputation shattered. That night, as the moon drifted across the sky, the Templars slept unaware. Their white mantles hung neatly along wooden racks. Candles flickered softly in chapel corners. Horses dozed in stables, shifting gently in the straw. There was no sign that the world was about to change. At dawn, the trap closed. Royal soldiers surrounded commanderies across the kingdom. Iron-shod boots crushed fallen leaves. Doors were pounded open. Confused brothers were pulled from their beds, their prayers interrupted, their morning routines shattered. Many did not resist, believing the intrusion must be a misunderstanding. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars had served faithfully. Why would the king turn against them? But confusion soon turned to horror as the accusations were read aloud. Heresy, idolatry, forbidden rituals, blasphemous oaths. The charges were grotesque and contradicted everything the order had ever stood for. Some Templars protested loudly, others remained silent in disbelief. They trusted that truth would prevail. They trusted that the Church would defend them. They trusted that their loyalty and sacrifice mattered. But Philip had anticipated this reaction and prepared for it. The arrested Templars were taken to prisons across France. Conditions were harsh. Food was scarce. Cells were dark and cold. And soon interrogators arrived, equipped with tools of torture sanctioned by royal authority. Under extreme duress, some prisoners broke. Desperate for mercy, they confessed to crimes they had not committed. These forced confessions were exactly what Philip needed. When news of the arrests spread, Europe was stunned. How could the Templars, once regarded as holy warriors, suddenly be accused of such terrible things? Many remained skeptical, yet the king's coordinated attack created an appearance of overwhelming evidence. Fear, confusion, and suspicion filled the air. Grand Master Jacques de Molay, the leader of the order, had been in France at the time of the arrests, attending what he believed was a peaceful meeting with papal officials. He too was seized. Under pressure, he initially confessed, another result of brutal interrogation. But in the days that followed, he retracted his words, insisting on the order's innocence. The Templars appealed to the Pope, hoping he would intervene. Clement V hesitated, torn between spiritual responsibility and political pressure from Philip. His uncertainty allowed the king's narrative to grow stronger. As you breathe softly, imagine the quiet despair within the Templar cells. Men who had devoted their lives to discipline, faith, and service now trapped in darkness, unable to understand why the world had turned against them. Their swords had helped shape kingdoms, yet no sword could defend them from this betrayal. The events of that dawn marked the beginning of the Templars' end, but their story was far from finished.
Let your breathing settle as we return to the quiet, somber cells where the Templars waited, uncertain, exhausted, and caught in currents far beyond their control. The arrests of October 1307 had shaken Europe, but the true conflict was only beginning. Now the stage shifted from armed force to political maneuvering, legal disputes, and whispered pressures within the halls of power. After the initial shock faded, many in Christendom began to question what had happened. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar had been symbols of piety and sacrifice. It was difficult to reconcile their reputation with the accusations now being spread by King Philip IV. Some nobles voiced doubts. Merchants whispered that the charges felt forced. Even common citizens wondered why the Templars would suddenly betray beliefs they had lived and died for. King Philip, however, moved quickly to reinforce his narrative. He publicized the coerced confessions, presenting them as irrefutable proof. These confessions, extracted under pain and fear, created a distorted image of the order, an image many were unwilling to accept, yet unable to openly oppose. At the center of this tension stood Pope Clement V, a man who never sought conflict, but now found himself trapped between loyalty to the Church and the relentless demands of the French crown. The Pope had initially been wary of Philip's actions, even criticizing the sudden arrests. But Philip responded by tightening political pressure, reminding Clement that the papacy now rested in French territory and French protection. Under this growing weight, Clement tried to assert some control. In late 1307, he demanded that the Templars be transferred to church custody. Philip refused. Instead, he insisted that his investigation continue and that the Pope endorse the trials. The struggle between crown and papacy grew more complex, weaving legal arguments with personal influence. Meanwhile, inside their prisons, the Templars faced interrogations that ebbed and flowed like shifting tides. Some brothers remained resolute, refusing to confess despite the threat of torture. Others, weakened by starvation and pain, repeated the accusations placed before them. A few hoped that compliance might grant mercy. A few others believed the ordeal was a test of endurance, trusting that truth would eventually surface. But each confession, no matter how unreliable, became another weapon for Philip. In early 1308, Clement V attempted a compromise. He suspended his criticism of Philip and agreed to conduct a papal inquiry into the order. The hope was to bring fairness and order to the chaos. But Philip's momentum was already too great. Public opinion had shifted, and fear of royal retribution prevented many from speaking on the Templars' behalf. The trials expanded across Europe, though reactions varied. In kingdoms like England and Aragon, local rulers hesitated to embrace the accusations. Some Templars were arrested, but others continued their work for months, even years, before royal commands forced harsher action. In Germany and parts of Italy, skepticism persisted, and some leaders openly doubted Philip's motives. But France remained the heart of the crisis, and it was there that the fate of the order would be decided. By 1310, the Pope's inquiries gathered testimonies from Templars who insisted on the order's purity. These statements challenged Philip's claims and suggested that the forced confessions were unreliable. For a brief moment, the Templars' hope flickered. Perhaps the truth would finally emerge. But Philip, ever strategic, intervened again. He pressured the church courts, silenced dissenters, and ensured that those who resisted his narrative faced imprisonment or worse. When a group of outspoken Templars attempted to defend the order publicly, they were declared relapsed heretics and executed by burning. The message was unmistakable. Resistance would be met with fire. These executions horrified many observers and silenced even more. Through it all, Jacques de Molay waited. The Grand Master, now older and weakened, still believed that the Church would ultimately recognize the order's innocence. He had served generations of kings, fought in countless battles, and upheld the vows of the Templar rule without compromise. To him, faith and duty were unbreakable. Surely the world would see that truth. But the currents of politics had shifted too far. The papacy was slipping under royal influence, public opinion had been reshaped by fear, and the Templars' once mighty network had been dismantled piece by piece. As you breathe slowly, imagine the quiet despair settling over the imprisoned brothers. Their world had been built upon discipline, faith, and service. Yet none of these virtues could shield them from the machinery of power now grinding toward its final judgment.
As we continue into Part 12, let your mind settle once more into a calm and steady rhythm.
Picture Europe in the early years of the 14th century. Kingdoms shifting, alliances forming and dissolving. And at the heart of it all, a quiet storm gathering in the halls of the church. The fate of the Knights Templar, once protectors of pilgrims and guardians of the Holy Land, now rested not on battlefields, but within council chambers lined with parchment and flickering candlelight. After years of pressure, confusion, and political entanglement, Pope Clement V resolved to address the Templar crisis through a formal council. This gathering, known as the Council of Vienne, would be held in the small French city of the same name. Starting in 1311, it brought together bishops, cardinals, scholars, and representatives from across Christendom. Their purpose was clear: to determine whether the order should be restored, reformed, or permanently dissolved. The Templars pinned their final hopes on this council. They believed that once the Church examined the evidence fairly, once confessions extracted under torture were set aside, the truth would shine through. They trusted in the centuries of loyal service they had given, the lives they had sacrificed, the vows they had upheld. Many still believed the Pope would protect them, even as political pressure mounted on every side. But Philip IV was not finished. He understood that the council represented a threat, an opportunity for the Church to assert independence and potentially clear the Templar name. And so he moved swiftly and ruthlessly. Philip arrived in Vienne with a strong presence, bringing legal advisors, influence, and the full weight of the French crown. His message was unmistakable: the Templars must be condemned. He argued that France had uncovered undeniable proof of heresy, and that allowing the order to continue would endanger both church and kingdom. Though many church officials remained doubtful, Philip's influence was as heavy as armor pressing against their decisions. Even the Pope, caught between duty and political survival, felt the strain. Within the council, debates unfolded with tense formality. Some bishops spoke cautiously in the Templars' defense, noting inconsistencies in the accusations. They pointed out that testimonies without torture contradicted those extracted under duress. Others raised questions about Philip's motives, though quietly, wary of provoking royal anger. But the balance of power was unmistakably tilted. Pope Clement V, seeking to navigate the storm, considered a compromise. Instead of condemning the Templars as heretics, which required clear proof, he proposed dissolving the order not by a definitive sentence of guilt, but by the weight of suspicion. This subtle phrasing allowed the Church to act without formally declaring the Templars guilty, yet still fulfilled the demands of the French crown. And so, in March of 1312, under immense pressure and amid the lingering shadow of royal power, the decision was made. The Knights Templar, who had fought in the deserts of the Holy Land, who had guarded pilgrims on perilous roads, who had lived by vows of poverty and obedience, were officially suppressed. Their order was to be dissolved. Their properties, outside of France, transferred to the Hospitallers. Their members were to be dispersed, retired, or judged individually. For the remaining imprisoned Templars, the news fell like a silent, heavy weight. There was no dramatic outcry, no rebellion, only a deep, exhausted grief. They had expected righteousness. They had hoped for justice. Instead, they received a political compromise forged under pressure. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, heard the news in captivity. Though weakened, he did not waver in his belief that the order was innocent and that the truth would one day be known. But the Council's decision marked the end of the Templars as an institution. Their lands would be divided, their symbols erased from official use, their houses abandoned or repurposed. In the quiet evenings that followed the Council's decree, Europe felt the echoes of an era fading. The red cross that had once fluttered above castles and battlefields would now be seen only in memory. The knights who had stood as guardians for nearly 2 centuries were now scattered, imprisoned, or awaiting judgment. As you breathe softly, imagine the final moments of that council, the murmuring voices, the rustle of parchment, the subtle tension lingering behind every word. It was not a fiery end, but a quiet extinguishing of a great order, one that still leaves questions centuries later. Settle into a slow breath as we begin Part 13, moving gently now into the final chapter of the Templars' earthly story. The order had been dissolved, its properties redistributed, its brothers scattered into quiet corners of Europe. But a few figures still remained imprisoned, figures whose fates would not only close the Templar era, but echo through centuries of legend. Among them stood the Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay. De Molay had dedicated more than 40 decades to the Templar cause. He had witnessed victories, defeats, and the long retreat from the Holy Land. He had argued for new crusades, stood against internal corruption, and carried the hopes of thousands of brothers. Now, at the end of his life, he found himself confined in a dim prison cell in Paris, awaiting the judgment of men who had already decided his fate. Still, he held on to belief in the Order's innocence, belief that truth had its own quiet strength. Even as the world around him shifted toward condemnation, de Molay did not abandon the vows he had lived by since youth. Alongside him were other high-ranking Templar leaders, Geoffrey de Charnay, the preceptor of Normandy, Hugues de Parot, and Geoffroy de Gonville. Each of them, though weakened by years of confinement, still understood that their testimonies carried weight. They represented not just themselves, but the honor of every knight who had ever taken up the Red Cross. In March of 1314, a commission assembled in Paris to announce the final sentences for these last Templar leaders. The decision, shaped heavily by Philip IV's demands and the Church's earlier verdict, declared that the men were guilty of heresy by virtue of their earlier confessions extracted through harsh interrogation. The sentence was imprisonment for life. It seemed, in that moment, that the last embers of the Templar story would simply fade into silence. But then, something unexpected happened. Jacques de Molay, weakened though he was, stood before the crowd and publicly retracted every confession he had ever given. His voice, though strained, carried a clarity shaped by conviction and age. He declared that the Templar order had been pure and faithful, that any confession he had made was forced by pain, fear, and the unbearable weight of torture. He spoke not in anger, but with calm resolve, like a man who had already accepted his fate and wished only to leave truth behind him. Geoffrey de Charnay followed, echoing the Grand Master's words with the same courage.
Their statements shocked the officials present. By retracting their confessions, they were now considered relapsed heretics, and the penalty for such a declaration was not imprisonment, but death by fire. King Philip acted swiftly. He had no intention of allowing their final words to influence public sentiment or weaken the narrative he had constructed. Without waiting for further church approval, he ordered their immediate execution. That evening, a scaffold was erected on Île de Cité, a small island in the heart of Paris. A pyre was built. Crowds gathered, drawn by the gravity of the moment. As flames flickered against the darkening sky, Jacques de Molay was led forward, still wearing the simple garments of a prisoner, yet walking with a calm dignity that impressed even those who doubted him. It is said by chroniclers of the time that he asked to face the cathedral, wishing to end his life looking toward the sacred heart of the city. Others wrote that he prayed softly, or that he addressed the watching crowds with peaceful solemnity. And as the flames were lit, he proclaimed once more the purity of the Templar order and the injustice of its destruction. Geoffrey de Charnay died beside him, steadfast until the final breath. The flames rose, crackling softly, their warmth carrying into the cool Paris night, and with them, the last living symbols of the Templars passed from the world of the present into the realm of memory. People who witnessed the execution carried the moment in their hearts years afterwards. Some claimed to hear de Molay's final words as a warning to the king and pope, though history cannot say for certain what was spoken in those final breaths. Yet the impression left behind was powerful, a sense that two faithful men had met death with honor, refusing to betray the truth they believed in. As you inhale softly, imagine the night settling around Paris, the river flowing quietly nearby, and the last voices of the Templar leadership fading into silence. With their passing, the order was not only ended, but transformed into legend. As we begin Part 14, breathe softly and let the story drift into a quieter phase. The years after the flames of Paris. With the death of Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay, the last visible resistance of the Templar leadership came to an end. But the order had been vast, with commanderies spread across Europe and thousands of brothers who were not high-ranking officials. Their lives did not all conclude with fire or imprisonment. Instead, the Templars faded, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly, into the folds of everyday life. Across France, many Templars had already been sentenced to lifelong confinement. Those who confessed under pressure and did not retract their statements were spared execution. Instead, they were dispersed to monasteries, living out their days under watchful eyes. Some were allowed to work in gardens or kitchens, quietly maintaining roles similar to monastic duties. Though they were no longer knights, their discipline and humility made them valued residents in these religious communities. In other parts of Europe, the response was far less severe. In England, for example, King Edward II initially doubted the accusations. Though he eventually complied with papal demands,
The English trials were gentler. Many Templars were questioned but found innocent of major wrongdoing. Their lands were confiscated, yet most members were allowed to retire peacefully, blending into local populations. They lived as farmers, laborers, or pensioned former knights, carrying their memories privately. In Portugal, a remarkable transformation occurred. King Denis, who respected the Templars and understood their importance, refused to see them destroyed. After years of careful negotiation with the Pope, he reorganized the former Templar Knights into a new order, the Order of Christ. Though different in name, it absorbed many Templar traditions, symbols, and members. Far from disappearing, the Templar spirit lived on and would later influence Portugal's age of exploration. In Spain, similar patterns emerged. The military orders were essential in the ongoing Reconquista, the long effort to reclaim Iberia from Moorish control. Disbanding the Templars entirely would have weakened regional defenses. And so, in kingdoms like Aragon and Castile, many Templars were integrated into other chivalric orders, such as the Calatrava or Montesa. Their martial skills remained valuable, and their loyalty continued to be trusted by local rulers. In Germany, Italy, and parts of Eastern Europe, skepticism of Philip IV's motives meant that many communities viewed the charges with suspicion. Here, too, the Templars were not seen as dangerous heretics, but as monks caught in political crossfire. Their properties were reassigned, but the men themselves were often allowed to fade into quiet anonymity. Yet for all these peaceful endings, the void left behind by the Templars did not go unnoticed. Their castles, some abandoned and others repurposed, stood as silent reminders of an order that had once shaped continents. The Red Cross, once so recognizable on battlefields, disappeared from official emblems. And in the whispers of taverns and marketplaces, people wondered why such a powerful order had fallen so suddenly. Knowledge spread slowly in a world without rapid communication, and understanding spreads even slower. Some believed the Templars had indeed been guilty of strange rites. Others insisted they were victims of politics and greed. But a large part of the population simply could not accept that such a dramatic downfall had such mundane causes. And so legends began to form. Some spoke of Templars who escaped France with treasure, slipping away in the night before Philip's soldiers arrived. Others whispered about secret rituals preserved in hidden places, waiting for a time when the order might rise again. In remote villages, old men claimed to have once seen Templar ships sailing toward distant shores, carrying secrets lost to history. These were stories born not from evidence, but from fascination and a lingering sense of injustice. The Templars had been symbols of courage, devotion, and purpose. When symbols fall, people seek meaning in the fragments left behind. In truth, most Templars lived out their final years quietly. They were men who had worn armor, ridden into battle, and sworn sacred vows, only to find themselves aging in gardens, kitchens, or farm fields. Some surely mourned the loss of their order. Others may have been grateful for peace after decades of warfare. but all carried with them the memory of a brotherhood that had defined their lives. As your breathing slows, imagine these scattered men, no longer warriors, no longer monks in the formal sense, walking gently through a world that had moved on without them. Their story was nearing an end, yet the seeds of something larger were beginning to take root. A legacy not of power, but of myth.
As we move gently into part 15, allow your breath to soften, your body to settle, and your mind to drift into the quiet spaces where history and legend begin to overlap. The fall of the Knights Templar had shaken Europe, but as the Order's physical presence faded, its memory began to grow in unexpected ways. A curious transformation took hold, from a dissolved military order to a symbol wrapped in mystery. In the years following Jacques de Molay's execution, stories began to circulate, sometimes whispered softly in market squares, sometimes shared among travelers after nightfall. These stories did not focus on the trials or political intrigues. Instead, they spoke of things hidden, things lost, things protected. And at the heart of these emerging tales was one idea: the Templar treasure. It's important to remember that the Templars were renowned bankers. They managed wealth for kings, nobles, and pilgrims. Their commanderies stored coins, jewels, documents, and property deeds. But records show that by the time the French crown seized their lands, surprisingly little treasure was found. This absence created a fertile ground for speculation. People wondered, where did it go? Had the Templars hidden it? Did someone carry it away in the night? One of the earliest and most enduring legends claimed that a fleet of Templar ships escaped from the port of La Rochelle on the very eve of the arrests in 1307. Chroniclers described how the king's soldiers found the harbor empty. The ships vanished without a trace. It was easy for imaginations to fill in the blanks. Perhaps the vessels sailed toward Scotland, or Portugal, or even across unknown seas. Perhaps they carried gold, relics, or secret documents. Perhaps they held the future of the order. Though no evidence confirms these stories, they grew naturally in a world hungry for meaning. And when a great order ends suddenly, people instinctively search for a missing piece, a final chapter that explains everything. Another legend emerged from the idea of hidden knowledge. Since the Templars had spent nearly 2 centuries in the Holy Land, many believed they had uncovered ancient secrets, teachings from early Christianity, lost scrolls, or mystical rites passed down through generations. These stories suggested that the Templars had not simply been warriors and bankers, but guardians of wisdom too powerful to reveal. Some even spoke of the Holy Grail, a symbol of divine grace woven deeply into medieval imagination. Did the Templars protect it? Did they transport it in secret? Or did they guard something less tangible, a spiritual truth passed quietly among their ranks? Again, none of these stories were recorded by the Templars themselves. They arose from yearning, from the human tendency to seek magic in the cracks of history. The more ordinary the real explanation became, the more extraordinary the legends grew. In Scotland, where political tensions with England created a refuge of sorts,
Tales claimed that fugitive Templars fought alongside Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn. Whether true or not, the image appealed strongly to the imagination. Exiled knights in white mantles, appearing at a desperate moment to shift the tide of history. In Spain and Portugal, the Templars' rebirth into new orders added to the mystique. People argued that the order had never truly died, it had simply changed its name. And when Portuguese explorers embarked on voyages that would reshape the world, the symbolism of the Order of Christ led some to wonder if Templar secrets had guided them across unknown oceans. The legends were not limited to treasure and secret knowledge. Some stories painted the Templars as protectors of lost heirs, caretakers of hidden bloodlines, or custodians of relics carried out of Jerusalem long before the Crusades. Over time, these tales expanded like ripples on water, weaving themselves into folklore, literature, and later into the modern imagination. What made these legends so enduring? Perhaps it was the silence left behind. The Templars did not get to tell their own ending. Their archives were seized, their leaders executed, their brothers dispersed. The suddenness of their fall created a vacuum, a quiet space where stories could take root, and people filled that space with wonder, suspicion, fear, and admiration. As you breathe gently, imagine medieval Europe in the decades after the Templar dissolution. The castles still stood, empty and echoing. Roads once patrolled by disciplined knights were now open to the unknown. And in the minds of ordinary people, the Templars became larger than life. Knights who fought for God, who fell to betrayal, and who might yet carry secrets hidden beyond the reach of kings.
As part 16 begins, let your breath fall into an easy rhythm, the kind that slows the world around you and lets history flow smoothly, like a gentle current carrying old stories downstream. The Knights Templar, though long dissolved, had become more than an order. They had become an idea. And ideas, once released, are very difficult to contain. In the centuries after their fall, Europe entered a period of profound change. The Middle Ages gradually gave way to the Renaissance, a time of rediscovery, learning, and renewed curiosity about the world. Ancient texts resurfaced. Philosophers questioned long-held beliefs. Artists and scholars began to explore the mysteries of history with fresh eyes. And in this climate of intellectual awakening, the Templar story enjoyed a quiet revival. People who studied the past, historians, chroniclers, monks, looked back at the Templar trials and began to sense something deeply unjust. The accusations seemed inconsistent, the confessions unreliable, the political motives unmistakable. And so slowly, the Templars shifted in the public imagination from possible heretics to likely victims of a king's ambition. This renewed sympathy affected how later generations retold their story. Writers began to highlight their bravery, their discipline, and their tragic downfall. The Templars became symbols of purity betrayed by corruption, of loyalty crushed by greed. Their legend softened, taking on a more romantic tone. By the time the Enlightenment dawned in the 17th and 18th centuries, curiosity about the Templars grew even stronger. Enlightenment thinkers valued reason and justice, and many looked back on the Templar trials with a critical eye. They saw not divine judgment, but political manipulation, not heresy, but persecution. This view further fueled the idea that the Templars were martyrs of a flawed system. It was during these centuries that a new layer of myth began to form, one tied to secret societies. The Enlightenment saw the rise of groups like the Freemasons, who gathered to discuss philosophy, science, and social ideals. Because the Masons drew on symbols of medieval stonemasons, some began to claim spiritual or symbolic descent from the Templars. These claims were not rooted in historical evidence, but in allegory and tradition, yet they sparked imaginations everywhere. In some Masonic rituals, Templar-inspired titles or motifs were introduced. The idea of a Templar degree or references to knightly virtues and lost knowledge. To participants, these were symbolic gestures meant to honor the values the Templars represented. But to outside observers, they seemed to hint at something deeper, perhaps even a secret lineage stretching back through time. Rumors took on new life. People wondered whether a hidden group of Templars had survived the Purge and continued in secrecy, passing down ancient wisdom from generation to generation. These ideas blended with the old legends, fleeing ships, hidden treasure, lost texts, to form a tapestry of speculation that blurred the lines between history and imagination. As printing became more widespread, books and pamphlets retold the Templar story in increasingly creative ways. Some portrayed them as guardians of mystical truths. Others connected them to conspiracies or cosmic secrets. Each generation added its own flavor, layering interpretation upon interpretation. But beneath these imaginative retellings, one thing remained constant: the fascination. No matter how the story changed, the Templars continued to represent something powerful: courage, mystery, betrayal, and resilience. Through the 18th and 19th centuries, this fascination only grew. Historians analyzed the trial documents. Poets romanticized the order's fall. Novelists used Templar symbols as dramatic plot elements. And through all these cultural echoes, the Templars became a bridge between the real past and the mythic one. You can imagine Europe during these centuries, filled with libraries, candlelit studies, and scholars leaning over old parchments. The rustle of pages, the scratch of quills, the dim glow of lanterns, all illuminating the story of an order long gone, yet vibrantly alive in the human imagination. The Templars had become more than knights in armor. They were now part of a collective memory that refused to fade. As your breathing slows, picture their image as it appeared in these later centuries. Noble silhouettes riding through time, their symbols glowing faintly in the cultural landscape. No longer bound to historical accuracy, they existed wherever people sought mystery or meaning.
Welcome to Part 17. As you settle in, let your body rest. Shoulders loose, jaw soft, breathing slow and steady. The story moves now into the modern era, where the Knights Templar, long vanished from the world, became more alive than ever in the human imagination. Their symbols, their myths, and their mysterious legacy began to echo through literature, art, and the rising world of mass storytelling. By the 19th century, the Templars were already the subjects of fascination, thanks to romantic writers who portrayed them as tragic heroes or enigmatic warriors. But as the world shifted into the 20th century, their legend grew even more powerful. New forms of media, novels, films, and later television gave storytellers vast new landscapes to explore, and the Templars became ideal characters for tales of adventure, mystery, and hidden truths. One of the strongest reasons for their enduring appeal was the perfect blend of fact and unknown. So much documentation had been lost, destroyed, or scattered after their suppression that entire chapters of their story were left open to interpretation. And in storytelling, an open space becomes an invitation, a place where imagination blossoms. Early adventure writers seized on this. They used Templar symbols, forgotten fortresses, and the idea of secret treasures as the backbone of thrilling narratives. These tales often took place in dusty archives or ancient cathedrals, where scholars uncovered clues leading to old Templar sites. The image of the white mantle and red cross became shorthand for a mystery waiting to be solved.
In the mid-20th century, as archaeology gained popularity and more people grew curious about the past, the idea of lost Templar secrets became a common motif. Popular magazines, documentaries, and historical fiction began to revisit the Templars again and again, each time adding their own tone, sometimes serious, sometimes playful, sometimes mystical. By the time the late 20th century arrived, the Templars had firmly entered global pop culture. Writers began to link them to hidden vaults beneath European cathedrals, coded messages in medieval art, and forgotten relics buried beneath remote landscapes. Although these stories were fictional, they drew from centuries of genuine mystery and legend, making them feel strangely plausible. This imaginative expansion grew even more dramatic with the arrival of blockbuster novels and films. The Templars appeared in thrillers that sold millions of copies, weaving them into plots involving secret societies, ancient bloodlines, and lost holy artifacts. While not historically accurate, these stories captivated audiences everywhere. They turned the Templars into symbols of deep, layered mysteries that seemed to sit just beneath the surface of everyday life. At the same time, modern conspiracy theories began to absorb Templar motifs. Some groups claimed that the Templars had secretly survived and continued to influence world events. Others proposed that they protected coded knowledge hidden within religious texts or architectural designs. Some theories linked them to the Holy Grail, imagining the Grail itself as a metaphor rather than a literal object, perhaps a lineage, a document, or a spiritual truth. While these claims have no historical foundation, they reveal something meaningful about the Templars' power as symbols. People often turn toward stories that offer a sense of mystery, purpose, or deeper understanding. And the Templars provide exactly that, a blend of nobility and tragedy, secrecy and revelation. Even in academic circles, interest in the Templars grew dramatically. Scholars began to re-examine surviving records, uncovering new insights into their daily lives, their finances, and their spiritual practices. Museums held exhibitions, universities offered specialized courses, and as knowledge increased, so did fascination. Today, when people hear the words Knights Templar, they often picture a dramatic mixture of history and myth. Armored knights riding in formation, secret rituals performed by torchlight, hidden vaults beneath ancient stone halls. These images capture the imagination precisely because they blend truth and storytelling in ways that invite curiosity rather than offer final answers. And perhaps this is why the Templars remain so enduring. Their actual history, rich, complex, and often misunderstood, provides a strong foundation. But it is the empty spaces, the unanswered questions, that allow each generation to reinterpret them anew. As your breath softens, imagine the modern world, filled with bookshelves, cinemas, quiet bedrooms where documentaries play softly, and late-night readers turning the last page of a Templar mystery novel. Across centuries, across continents, their story continues to inspire awe.
Part 18 invites you to settle gently into a slower rhythm, letting the quiet calm of the night ease your thoughts as we move from myth and imagination back toward the grounded legacy the Knights Templar left in the world. While legends swirl around them, the Templars' real contributions shaped Europe in ways that still ripple quietly beneath modern life. One of the most significant gifts the Templars left behind was their influence on finance and banking. In a medieval world where long-distance travel was dangerous, carrying gold made a pilgrim a tempting target for bandits. The Templars devised an elegant solution, a system of deposits, withdrawals, coded receipts, and credit. A traveler could hand over their money at a Templar commandery in Europe, receive a written note, and redeem it for funds upon reaching the Holy Land. In today's terms, it resembled a combination of modern checks, letters of credit, and secure banking networks. Their system improved trust in international transactions and set early foundations for the financial institutions that now support global economies. It was surprisingly advanced for its time, and though the order eventually fell, the concept survived. The Templars also left a lasting mark on law and governance. Their rule book, the Latin Rule, was one of the most detailed organizational documents of the medieval period. It outlined everything: daily routines, responsibilities, financial procedures, discipline, charity, and hierarchy. Many aspects of this system influenced later orders, both military and monastic. Their structure showed how large international organizations could operate with consistency and discipline across many territories long before nation-states existed. Another area where their influence endures is architecture. Templar sites, castles, commanderies, and churches were built with a distinctive combination of practicality and symbolic meaning. Many of their fortresses featured concentric defenses, an innovation in military architecture that improved protection against sieges. Their round churches, inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, stand out across Europe even today. These circular structures, with their calm symmetry and soft acoustics, create a sense of quiet centeredness that still resonates with visitors. Templar sites often sit on elevated ground, near water sources, or along well-traveled routes. Their locations were chosen with care, places where travelers could rest, trade, or seek protection. In some regions, local communities grew around these commanderies, shaping the geography of towns and road networks that remain active centuries later. Beyond physical structures,
the Templars influenced the development of chivalric ideals. Their code emphasized obedience, humility, courage, and service. While they were unquestionably warriors, they also valued discipline and self-restraint. Later chivalric orders adopted similar values, weaving them into the broader cultural fabric of medieval Europe. Even in modern storytelling, whether films, novels, or games, knightly codes and honorable warriors often reflect ideas shaped in part by Templar tradition. Their dissolution also left an important historical lesson. The abrupt end of the Templars demonstrated how vulnerable even powerful institutions could be when they faced political ambition. Their trials highlighted the dangers of coerced confessions and unchecked authority, lessons that influenced later legal reforms as Europe slowly moved toward systems based on evidence and due process. But perhaps their most enduring legacy is more subtle: the memory of a brotherhood bound by purpose. The Templars created a sense of unity among men from many regions and languages. They shared vows, duties, and a sense of mission that transcended personal ambition. This idea, that people could devote themselves fully to a common cause, continued to inspire future religious and military orders long after the Templars themselves were gone. Even the places they once occupied seemed to retain a quiet echo of their presence. Visitors often describe a feeling of stillness inside Templar ruins, as if the past lingers gently in the stones. Whether real or imagined, this sense of continuity reminds us that history lives on not just through documents, but through the atmosphere of the landscapes it touched.
As you relax into the sound of this story, let your breath soften, slow, and settle. Tonight, we turn to a quieter, more careful kind of exploration: how modern historians work to separate the genuine history of the Knights Templar from the myths that have grown around them like vines around ancient stone. The fascination with the Templars has created a unique challenge for scholars. Their story is one of the most written about subjects in medieval history, yet much of what people know comes from legends, novels, movies, and speculative theories. Historians today approach the Templar narrative with both curiosity and caution, sifting through documents that survived war, fire, time, and political manipulation. One of their first tasks is to examine primary sources. These are the records created during the Templars' own time: official charters, letters, financial accounts, and the transcripts of their trials. Some of these sources remained preserved in monastic archives or royal libraries. Others were discovered much later, tucked away in unexpected places. Each piece is like a quiet voice from the past, offering a glimpse into the daily realities of Templar life. Yet even primary sources must be read carefully. Many of the trial documents were written under the direction of King Philip IV's officials, who had strong motives to portray the Templars negatively. Confessions made under torture are viewed with skepticism, and conflicting testimonies require thoughtful comparison. Modern historians work almost like detectives, piecing together what is reliable and what is suspect. To deepen their understanding, scholars also study archaeological evidence. Excavations at former Templar commanderies reveal traces of their routines: pottery, tools, coins, horse gear, and remnants of fortification structures.
Sometimes researchers uncover symbols carved into stone, simple crosses, geometric patterns, or marks left by masons. These quiet artifacts help paint a picture of life within the order, showing how Templars lived, worked, and interacted with surrounding communities. In recent decades, new tools such as digital mapping, ground-penetrating radar, and laboratory analysis have allowed researchers to explore old sites in ways early historians could never have imagined. These discoveries reveal the layout of buildings long collapsed and sometimes uncover hidden rooms or forgotten foundations. Through these discoveries, historians gain a clearer view of how the Templars organized their space and resources. Another important part of modern study involves context. Historians compare the Templars with other institutions of their time, like the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, and monastic orders such as the Cistercians. By examining similarities and differences, scholars can better understand what made the Templars unique and what elements simply reflected the customs of the medieval world. For example, the Templars' financial system seems innovative, but historians show that it grew naturally from earlier practices in monastic accounting and merchant banking. Their military tactics, while disciplined and effective, were shaped by the broader strategies of crusader warfare. Their austere clothing and communal lifestyle mirrored the customs of other religious orders. Through this comparative approach, myths fall away, and the Templars emerge as both extraordinary and grounded in their era. Modern researchers also address popular misconceptions. One common myth suggests that the Templars possessed secret knowledge or mystical power. While this makes for exciting stories, historians point out that no credible evidence supports these claims. The order's spirituality was deeply rooted in mainstream Christian thought of the time, and their rituals were straightforward, focused on prayer, obedience, and community. Another misconception involves treasure. While the Templars handled immense wealth, most of it moved constantly through their financial network rather than accumulating in secret vaults. Their accounts show that money was often lent out, reinvested, or used to maintain their infrastructure. The lack of a recovered treasure does not imply a hidden hoard, only that their wealth was primarily administrative rather than physical. And yet, historians acknowledge why myths persist. The gaps in documentation, the dramatic rise and fall of the order, and the political intrigue surrounding their end all invite speculation. Human imagination naturally bends toward mystery, especially where silence exists. So historians approach the topic with patience, understanding that myth and history often exist side by side. What makes modern Templar scholarship so peaceful and fascinating is this careful balance, respecting the legends that form part of our cultural heritage, while also appreciating the quiet truth revealed through study. It is a gentle peeling back of layers, removing embellishment to reveal the human story beneath.
The final chapter of this long and gentle journey. As we bring the story of the Knights Templar to a close, allow your body to relax a little more deeply. Shoulders resting, breath slow and even. Your thoughts drifting softly, like pages turning in an old, familiar book. Throughout nearly 2 centuries of history, the Knights Templar rose, thrived, and fell. Yet in the 7 centuries since their dissolution, their presence has only grown stronger. Few historical groups have left such a lasting imprint on the imagination. The question, then, is why? Why do the Templars continue to captivate us long after their fortresses crumbled and their order vanished into memory? Part of the answer lies in the contrast at the heart of their story. They began as humble protectors of pilgrims, poor knights with simple equipment and a vow of poverty. Yet they became one of the most powerful organizations of the medieval world. Their transformation from modest defenders to legendary warriors creates a dramatic arc that feels almost literary, a journey suited for storytelling. Their mysterious downfall adds another layer. Their arrest in 1307 was sudden, coordinated, and shrouded in accusations so implausible that they invite doubt even today. Betrayed by a king they once served, judged by a system vulnerable to pressure, and dissolved by a pope caught in political turmoil, the Templars' end feels both tragic and unresolved. Such stories naturally create an aura of mystery. Human curiosity thrives in silence, and the gaps in their history leave space for imagination to blossom. Lost documents, destroyed archives, secretive rituals, and the abruptness of their suppression all foster a sense that something remains hidden, even if what's hidden is simply the truth of ordinary lives lived in extraordinary times. We are also drawn to the Templars because they embody timeless themes. Their brotherhood speaks to our longing for belonging. Their discipline and courage reflect our ideals of honor. Their devotion reminds us of the human need for purpose. Their fall warns us of the dangers of power misused. In them, we see reflections of our own hopes and fears. Across centuries, different cultures found different meanings in their story. For some, the Templars became symbols of noble sacrifice. For others, guardians of spiritual secrets. For modern writers and filmmakers, they became catalysts for adventure, mystery, and discovery. Each generation reshaped them, weaving new threads into the tapestry of their legend. Yet, at the core of this vast and varied fascination lies something simple. The Templars feel unfinished. Their order did not fade gradually. It was cut off abruptly, leaving a sense of incompletion. No final testimony, no last message, no clear closure. The human mind, seeking resolution, fills that quiet space with questions, theories, and dreams. And perhaps that is why their story remains so peaceful to explore. The Templars are not fully known, nor fully unknowable. They occupy a gentle middle ground, part history, part myth, where every listener can find something meaningful. Today, their symbols still appear in architecture, literature, art, and even video games. Their round churches still stand beneath soft European skies. Their fortresses remain perched on hillsides overlooking valleys that have changed only slowly with time. Their name is spoken in university lectures, whispered in fiction, and explored in documentaries watched in quiet rooms at night. As your breath settles, imagine these places. A Templar chapel where candlelight once flickered against stone walls. A forgotten commandery overgrown with moss. A lonely tower standing beside a river. These landscapes hold no secrets, and yet they feel touched by history. They remind us that the past is never truly gone. It lingers gently in the world around us, waiting to be noticed. The Knights Templar may have vanished as an order, but they endure as an idea, a symbol, a story.
Their memory connects us to a distant time when faith, duty, and danger shaped the rhythm of life. Their rise and fall echo through the centuries like a quiet melody, heard faintly but clearly by those who pause to listen. And now, as this final chapter closes, let yourself drift with that sense of calm history, the knowledge that stories, even when they end, continue to live softly in the heart. Thank you for joining this long journey, part by part, through one of the most intriguing chapters of the medieval world. May the peace of this story stay with you as you rest.